Still hitting the ball with a bat.
Mark. Hello, everyone. We are very pleased to be joined tonight by Chief of Police for the town of Greenburgh, Chief Kobie Powell. He'll be giving us a quick introduction about himself, a little bit about his background, how he became chief, his years in the town and years in the Greenburgh Police, and then we're going to open up to Q&A. So, we want, as Chief Powell mentioned earlier, that's kind of primarily going to be the focus. My name is Eric Zayer. I'm with the Hartsdale Neighbors Association. We are a civic association based out of Hartsdale. You can find us at www.hartsdaleneighbors.org. You can find us at Facebook if you just search for Hartsdale Neighbors. And if you have a question, you can email us at info@hartsdaleneighbors.org. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, you can just send us an email there. You can sign up on the website as well. So hartsdaleneighbors.org and info@hartsdaleneighbors.org. We've had Chief McNerney in the past a couple times. We're now pleased to be able to join to host Chief Powell, and we do these from time to time. We recently hosted our Assemblywoman in New York, Mary Jane Shimsky, Assemblywoman Shimsky, and that's on our YouTube page as well. So all these events that we can record, if we can record them, we do and put them up on YouTube, and you can go back and watch them there. We also do candidate interviews and things like that for school board, for fire district, for local elections when there's a contested one. We like to host candidates nights, and again, if you can't join us in person, we do like to record those. And if you're interested in going back, you can go back and get those down. So we are very pleased tonight. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Chief Kobie Powell to introduce himself. Thank you for joining us tonight.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm also thankful Eric reminded me. But sometimes I like meeting with smaller groups. As you can tell, there's two people in the room that I've met before, had conversations with before, and it was a little bit more relaxed, just small talking with. Sometimes when I'm able to just kind of have that informal conversation about what people need, what people are looking for, what we're doing, what we want to do, what people may want us to do when we simply can't do right now. I generally prefer when I can just be a little bit more candid. At the same time, I realize too that just as a representative of the chief executive officer of the police department, representing the town, that this is being recorded. I may be a little less candid and less internal than I was hoping to be. But no, it shouldn't be an issue either way. But if you see me pause to think about how I want to respond to something, it's Eric's fault. So, that being said, my name is Kobie Powell. I'm a lifelong Greenburgh resident. Even when I moved out of my mother's home, I ended up getting an apartment in Hartsdale for a few years before moving into another location with my wife, and then my wife and I yet again in the town. So I actually worked in this library for a number of years as a teenager and a young man. And I actually didn't leave the payroll here at the library until I was hired by the police department. I kept my part-time employment here until I had to give it up to take the job as a police officer. That being said, like everyone that's hired by the Greenburgh Police Department, you start in patrol, you go to police academy, you receive your initial training, you get out of the police academy, and you go to work, you ride as a field training officer, and you learn how the things that you learned in the police academy apply to the actual road and town and interacting with people for real versus just training scenarios. I was fortunate where I made sergeant relatively early in my career, made sergeant in 2004. I was assigned to the detective division as a detective sergeant, first in the juvenile aid unit, then in general investigations. And then I went back to the juvenile aid unit, which became the special victims unit. The special victims unit, which we still have, the department still has, it incorporates everything that the juvenile aid unit did in terms of investigating crimes committed by and against juveniles, mediations, child abuse cases, things of that nature, but also was expanded to include pretty much all the domestics and other types of crimes of sexual nature. One thing that I learned, and this is part of why when I take a moment to think how I want to express something, when you work with children, and essentially in any type of field of employment, especially as a police officer, when you deal with families, it behooves you to be straightforward. What happens is if you're not, or if you leave something out, or if you're not truthful, you wind up having to deal with the same children, the same families again. Once you destroy trust, it is very difficult to regain. And not that I didn't have an understanding of that before my assignment, but it really just became of how I try to do my job. And it's been a part of how I try to do my job, regardless of the position since. 2017, I became the Special Investigations Lieutenant, which essentially is civilian complaints, internal affairs, administrative investigations. I was the only lieutenant in the department to report directly to the chief. I held that position for approximately 5 years. It was expanded to the Professional Standards Division. A detective and a sergeant were added for some extra responsibilities, facilitating work. And I held that position until last August, when I was promoted to chief of police. In the time that I've been chief of police, it's been about 9 months now. What I've really been trying to do is, I keep making this statement somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but seriously, try not to fix anything that isn't broken. Trying to listen and find out what people want, what people need, what we really should be focused on doing. And, just trying to have a police department where we're professional, we're trusted, where our residents appreciate us, and where we have that trust, where they work with us to address the things that need to be addressed with them. So, like I said earlier, it's really more important for me to listen, or for me to at least, establish that communication, so that when your neighborhood has issues, I'm aware of them. If it's something where it's a police department matter, I can have the appropriate police department, personnel look into it, investigate it, check up on it. If it's something where I need to reach out to another department head with the town of Greenburgh, I can do that. And I definitely have had a great experience working with the other department heads. Sometimes we have things where it's my shop, it's their shop, maybe there's some shared responsibility, and we've really been able to utilize that relationship for the benefit of different concerns in the town. That's my opening spiel. I didn't know if there's anything in particular you would like to hear from me. I can share with you what I've observed, particular reoccurring crime trends and issues to be over the last 9 months, and what we're doing to address those. And so with that, post-COVID, post-discovery, bail reform, there has definitely been an uptick in larcenies, pretty much of all types, but shoplifting especially. It's been in a reoccurring trend for quite some time. Young people, criminals, not necessarily people, going around pulling car door handles. If the car door is locked, they move on. If the car door is unlocked, they rummage through the car and steal whatever they feel is worth stealing. Car door is unlocked and they rummage through the car and they happen to find the key in the car. They take the car. Also recently, there's been a trend with some Kias and Hyundais, but the way they're manufactured and made, that some thieves figured out a way to essentially start the vehicle with a USB port and a little bit of effort. And we did have one incident where we feel those vehicles were targeted. I'm going to circle back to that. So, but in addition to the shoplifting, the larcenies from vehicles, the larcenies of vehicles, catalytic converter thefts from vehicles, there's precious metals in the catalytic converter, and that's been an ongoing trend, reoccurring, not just in Greenburgh, but all over. There have been task forces, there's communication between different agencies, but the criminals that go out and do this, they don't make a plan to just victimize the town of Greenburgh for a month and then move on to Rockland or move on to Harrison. It's somewhat random, spread around, and it's always helpful when you know, people hear something out of the ordinary, see something out of the ordinary, they call us, we send an officer to check. As a younger police officer, I had a few burglary arrests. And really the only reason I had that arrest is because an alert homeowner heard something, saw something, made a phone call, and I was able to get there quickly enough to catch something that wasn't quite right and stop the right vehicle. So, you know, we definitely, you know, going back to just policing 101, you know, the police are the people and the people are the police. We need the help, we need the cooperation. Sometimes we can do good work and we don't have it. We do our best work when we do have it. So in response to a lot of these steps, what we've been doing is on days of the week and times where we noticed they were a little more prevalent, we've staffed extra officers specifically for the purpose of, you know, extra officers, extra eyes out looking, potentially deterring or catching someone. Something that we did to great success was, and it's really the first time that the department has done this, with the shoplifting arrests or the shoplifting. A lot of the commercial premises, the retail premises, they have different policies. So we have certain stores that, since this is being recorded, maybe I shouldn't mention it by name, but we have certain stores where they tend to have more shoplifters than others. There's maybe 10 I could rattle off where they're the bulk. And they all have different policies for, you know, wait for them to leave the store, or only the manager can call, but the key holder can't, you know, and only press charges if it's over this amount, and all kinds of, you know, different rules that the employees have to adhere to or risk losing their jobs. So what we did was combined effort patrol and the detective division. We reached out to the managers, loss prevention officers, people that work for these locations, just to coordinate with them, find out what their policy was, let them know what we need if they actually want us to catch the person, charge them, arrest them, recover the property. There was one store where they were calling us to file a report an hour after the theft had occurred and the person left with the proceeds. And so in that sense, you're just calling us to take a report. What do you realistically expect us to do as police if you're going to be an hour? So we also conducted an operations where we staffed extra officers, coordinated with loss prevention, and during times of day where the larcenies were occurring with more frequency, we were able to have more officers available. We went out, they made a bunch of arrests that day. And we're just trying to partner and use the resources we have intelligently. We did have 2 arrests, 2 young men from Manhattan. I have it with me, but I'm not going to wish you time while I look at it. It was May 22nd, it was the end of May. Stolen vehicle, proceeds from other larcenies in the vehicle. And, you know, we are out there driving around, looking around, trying to, and I can't put extra officers on every night because obviously I have to be responsible for the budget. But, you know, efforts are being made in different ways to just kind of address some of these issues. When it comes to quality of life issues, things that just the average homeowner may have concerns with. As we all know, our town supervisor drives around, call, you can email him. I get a lot of emails that way. There are also connections I've made with people from different civic associations where some have my number, or have my email. If it's something I need to know, whether I direct it to the traffic and safety supervisor or the community affairs lieutenant or whoever I direct it to, essentially the big thing is let us know if there's an issue, people speeding on this road, or the hedges here make it unsafe to make this turn, or, you know, even sometimes it may relate to crime, although, you know, it's better to call if you want to remain anonymous than send an email. But, you know, we can even talk about ways where if there's something that you're concerned for, but you don't necessarily want to put yourself in the middle of, you know, there's also ways to get that information to us. In terms of my plan, my vision, again, it's 9 months. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I've figured it all out. But again, I also live here. you know, and I am getting a sense of the things that are more important to people. Big thing is, you know, we have bus stops, and if people are speeding through an area during the time of day that the buses are coming, everyone has an issue with it, except the person doing it. You know, but if I know about it, I can make sure there's an officer checking on it. If I don't know about it, you know, then it's really just whether or not the officer happens to be coming through when it happens. But I do hope to bolster our community affairs and traffic and safety units. Working with the town board regarding our staffing. Can't really go into it any more than that right now. But what I really hope and envision is that for us to be able to respond to our calls for service, for us to be able to be proactive in certain situations without having to take officers from this area, this area, send them over to this area, you know, to deal with something. I'd rather be able to more or less have officers that I can designate to certain issues, like using the traffic unit for some of the speeding, stop sign, traffic complaints, without having to have the sector officer that's supposed to be driving through your neighborhood, sitting at a stop sign, a traffic light on a particular stretch of road for that day. And we're really just working on intelligently managing our resources and meeting the needs that come to us. So I'm going to keep my word about not rambling. I guess this is your meeting, so
yeah. So thank you, Chief. I would say anyone who has a question, if there's you know, I would say, you know, topics that would be of, you know, general interest rather than a specific situation would be preferable. But if anyone has a question, I would say now would be a great time to go ahead.
And if it's something that you want to ask me but don't necessarily want to ask me on a recorded meeting, I have to leave about maybe 5 minutes to 8-ish, but you can catch me before I go if it's something you don't want to ask.
So I would love, that was a great assessment of what's happening with regard to crime and police services. So police also is in charge of EMT also. Yeah. Could you provide your assessment in a similar fashion to EMT and what's happening in the partnership with fire departments?
I'm absolutely annoyed at myself for leaving that out. Yes, we are also the EMS agency.
We're here to help. We're here. This is cool.
We're also the EMS agency for the town. Mm-hmm. And we provide paramedic and basically ALS and BLS, which is to simplify it, paramedic and EMT service for the town, and then paramedic service for the surrounding villages. And what a lot of people don't realize is we're one of a very few agencies in New York State that do both. And we have officers that are paramedics, officers that are EMTs, and then we also have civilian paramedics and EMTs. I actually was trained by the police department and became an EMT within about 13 months of getting hired by the police department. And the thing that's great about that is just, you know, as a police officer, you respond to a lot of calls and a lot of things that you're dealing with, you know, have the potential to be negative. People aren't always happy to see you. Even the people that are happy to see you, things don't always play out the way they want them to. And doing the EMS has always been an outlet where, you know, yes, there's, you know, some outcomes that, you know, weren't what we would have hoped for. You know, there are elements of it, along with police work, fire service, any type of emergency service that can wear on you. But it also gives you a chance to help people, interact with people in a different type of way. And I do believe, I know I enjoyed it, and I believe that the bulk of our officers, even our officers that are not EMS trained, they may be just a certified first responder, they still go on these calls. They assist the medics, they assist the EMTs, and even though they may not have the same level of training, they learn what's necessary, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. A lot of these calls are, you know, mental health calls, and it's all part of really how you're socialized as a Greenburgh police officer going on these different types of calls. Our paramedic supervisor, Jared Rosenberg, he does an excellent job. He'll still, even though his responsibilities are primarily administrative, if a serious enough call comes over, or, you know, multiple units are tied up, he will run out and take a call. We utilize the combination of our civilians and our officers well, where our response time is a little over 4 minutes per call. Occasionally we beat that, occasionally something happens and it takes longer. Normally when it takes longer and it's brought to our attention, we take a look at why it took longer. But the state average, I believe, is around that. It's just, for me, as it's always been as an officer and, you know, as chief now, something that's an important part of not just what we do, but who we are. And, you know, it's, I'm just pleased with how it's been operating. You know, just with anything, there are occasionally times we have to review something or something might not have been handled quite the way you would have liked. You know, training is an ongoing thing, whether it's a conversation with the supervisor after the call, you know, something more serious or something, a new employee, maybe they did something a little different or simply didn't know. Communication is always key. But, you know, if that answers the question, it's something where we're constantly training, we're constantly reviewing, but it's an important part of what we do, who we are, and I'm overall pleased with the service we provide.
Do you think you have adequate staffing in that area?
We added EMTs earlier this year because we were responding to more calls for service and we were sending, there's mutual aid plan. So sometimes we have to send our paramedics to other agencies. This was happening a lot, but if we have two paramedics working and one of them is in a village or one of them is in White Plains or another jurisdiction, obviously we have less available for the town. What hiring the extra EMTs did was it allowed us to keep an extra ambulance. If you have two in an ambulance, one can tech, one can drive. And if it's not a higher level medical call, then the paramedic can remain free for the next call that comes in while the BLS EMTs handle the less demanding call. You know, again, it's all timing. And for the time that I'm standing here talking to you right now, we could have 0 calls. And the second I walk out that door, we could have 3 or 4 come in at the same time. Or we could have a car accident where multiple people are injured. So there's always a little, for lack of a better expression, luck of the draw with it. But for the most part, the mutual aid system exists for that reason. And overall, it's working. I mean, look, I would always love to have more, but I have to be reasonable in what I ask.
What's BLS distinction?
Basic life services and advanced life services.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question about EMS if I can. You know, that's a great response time. How often would you say, like on a monthly basis, do you think we're facing response times of like 10, 15, 20 minutes? Like, because I know it does happen, and obviously
For us, I mean, and as that number gets higher,
like
for us, rarely. And
more than once a month.
you know what, I
More than
honestly,
5? I'm not gonna pin you on it.
no, I honestly wouldn't be able to answer that cold, nothing in front of me. I know there was something recently where we had a response time that was a little longer than normal. We are looking into it. You know, and what happens too sometimes, whether, again, it's who and what's available, if we call for mutual aid, or if the paramedic or EMT that's at the medical center or White Plains Hospital dropping off a patient can maybe get out of there a little bit more quickly, so we don't have to call another agency. There's a lot of things that come into play, but overall, our response times are good, and we try to do what we can to keep it that way.
Listen,
How's the coordination with the fire department work in terms of EMT? I've lived here 20 years exactly. I've had maybe 3 or 4 occasions call for EMT issues, and it seems like the fire department is always there as well. So in terms of like balancing out like your demands in the fire department, I guess demands in the police department, like how is there coordination there, or is it just who gets there?
But what happens is, depending how the call comes in, usually it will come to us. We are the EMS agency. The fire alarms tend to go to the fire department first, but pretty much the other types of calls for service will come to us first. What we will do is we will notify the fire department and I'm trying to think of a concise example, but generally speaking, the call will come into our dispatch. The dispatch will send, depending on the nature of the call. Let's say it's someone having a heart attack, stroke, perceived serious medical emergency. We'll send a sector officer, we'll send a paramedic, perhaps an EMT, an ambulance, and we'll notify the fire department. the fire department will respond as well. Occasionally, people call and they just say, look, I have asthma, I'm having a hard time breathing, my pump's not working. I don't need, the entire police department and fire department over here. Can you just send, and then, we'll maybe not send everyone, or depending on the circumstances, if we know it's something that is pure BLS. We've had people call for things like, I think I broke my toe, and maybe they have to go to the hospital and we need to take them to the hospital. But at the same time too, we don't need the entire police department, entire fire department to take someone for a broken toe. So, there is a little, but what we generally do is we will notify the fire department. They will respond. There are times when we may have more resources respond than we need. And then there are times when we need everybody that's there, and perhaps I remember going on 80 cases where, you have a house, a home, stairs, the patient, may be heavy, may not be ambulatory, may not be able to walk on their own. And, we're trying to treat them, we're trying to carry them and move them. Now we have all kinds of things where the stair chairs and the stretchers are motorized. There was a time when they weren't, and had to have people, and, when obviously having the extra hands on deck, so to speak. It was always put like this: if it was your family member, you would want to have more, not less. And truth is, if they respond and we really don't need, even with the police force, sometimes we have more officers respond than are needed. Then it's on the bosses. You know what? We thought it was this. It's only this. You go back to post. And that's pretty much how it operates.
Does the fire department ever operate as a backup if the EMSs are on call?
What it is they may be notified, and on rare occasion, and I don't even want to say rare because they do a good job of helping. They may get there first. If they get there first, they initiate care, and they may it could be a cardiac arrest. They will get the person off the bed on the floor, start doing compressions, start bagging, start doing whatever they can until the higher level of care is there.
Fire department doesn't have any ambulances, so they can't transfer.
We also have all the equipment.
Was well trained.
But they are trained, right?
They have trained EMTs, but even and
They have a
again,
little elasticity there.
years ago, there was a woman, she was having a stroke. I got there, I was a sector officer. I had an airway bag in my bag. I ran in, I got there before anybody else. I put her on oxygen. I laid her down, put her on oxygen, and actually laid her down actually at that particular, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. Putting her on oxygen and sitting her up actually helped, like almost immediately. And, even though it seems like a small thing, again, I've had the misfortune of having to call for EMS service to my home. And you know what? Being somewhere where we get there quickly and the people are well trained, they know what they're doing. Even again, if it's just the officer and the paramedics not there, if they can start giving aid, our officers have given people the Noxalone and reverse drug overdoses for people. Like a lot of times it's really just whoever can get there first and get started trying to help the person first. There's a benefit. And then everyone else is coming.
Yeah, I don't know. So I've lived here for 9 years. I've never had any problems. I mean, look, I know there's the crime is a lot of burglary, as you said, mostly, automobiles, that type of thing. I mean, as chief of police, it's got to be frustrating for you because the catch and release laws. I mean, there's really no incentive for people to stop shoplifting right now. But that's not my question. My question really comes down to what's going on now with the asylum seekers and the city of New York deciding to ship them elsewhere. Now, I know you're the chief of police, and this is probably something more for the town supervisor. I know, like the city of White Plains took in some asylum seekers, and they conveniently put them in a motel, on the Hartsdale border. So my question really is, a lot of these folks, don't have anything to do right now, and they may cause problems down the line. Have you guys discussed this, or have any kind of plans to anticipate any potential crime?
What I'll say is this. And,
Okay.
Obviously, I'm not a town working, but I'm not a politician.
Right.
48 years old. I've lived here my whole life. I have my opinions.
Yeah.
But I also have my job.
Right.
So separating those out, what I will say is, we haven't had any issues to my knowledge with that. Again, what we do is we patrol, we observe, we respond to calls for service. If issues arise, I spoke about, mutual aid between, the EMS services and communicating with the department heads. We also have good communication with surrounding agencies. So if there is something going on where we need to help each other, we need to communicate, there are lines of communication and things we can do to address mutual concerns. And I'll just leave that as my answer more generally. But in terms of any issues that have occurred, as yet related to that.
Yeah, no, it's really, it's a question, my wife brought the question up, she's a little bit more concerned about it than I am, so I'm somewhat indifferent. But no, she just wanted to know if there was any kind of plans in the work. Okay, thank you.
It's, again, I'll let my answer stand for itself. For the most part, there are times when we know, okay, this is gonna create a greater demand for, there's a difference between 20 people, 30 people, and 200 people.
Right.
And even if it were 200 people, that does not necessarily mean that it's going to create issues for the police department per se. Obviously, the more people you have, the higher the odds for something the police are gonna have to respond to, because that's just people. That could be us in this room. But that being said,
Especially me.
but that being said, the amount of people in regards to what I'm aware of, anything that's been brought to our attention, any calls for service, there have been no issues. And you know what, any issues that occur, just like with anything else with the police department, we'll deal with them as they occur. If they look like they're going to be reoccurring issues, we'll have the communication that we need to have to try to prevent further in future.
Thank you.
I got a question. I want to take you back to promise earlier, about the cars. Did you say Hyundais or Honda?
It's Hyundai. I know it's actually, I mix it up, but Hyundai, Hyundai, and Kias. But I believe that the manufacturers have started alerting the vehicle owners. It has to do with the vehicles that do not have the push button start.
They're not,
I got
they're
a
not
software.
prepared to fix it though, because and it's,
I've heard that there are either secondary immobilizers you can add, things you can do to just kind of make the vehicle a little safer if you don't have the luxury of being able to put it in a garage. And even, you leave the house. When you leave the house, whether you're at work or wherever you're at, it's not gonna necessarily be in a garage. But I did hear that, there are some secondary measures you can take if, the manufacturer can't necessarily address it for your model year.
we just put a car in the, like, we put 4-car driveway, so we put it in.
You block it in.
So they can't.
But these cars with a conventional ignition key that they're able to.
Right, my understanding is it's not the push button, so I believe traditional, ignition key.
Because you mentioned something before about a USB.
Well, that is one of the methods where I don't necessarily want to sit here and teach a class on how to do it, and I haven't actually tried it.
Yeah, you don't have the.
But they basically access behind the steering wheel, and they're able to more or less trick the car into believing that the ignition should turn over versus but they can't do it with the push button start vehicles.
But through some computer tech thing, not just hot wiring.
You can go on TikTok and they show you how to.
Yeah, here we go.
If
All the
you
people
go on
that hear
YouTube,
this
it's probably
know all about it.
quick, but,
Right, everybody knows about it anyway, but for us ignorant people that don't know, I'm just trying to get an idea like what.
No, well, what I'll say is this, if I had to do it on the spot, I don't know that I would be able to, but I know that it's for the vehicles without the push button start. And that there means to, with very simple tools, access behind the steering column and get the car to turn.
And these are fairly low value cars, a Kia and a Hyundai. Are they reselling them? Are they-
Well, I believe these are the slightly older ones that don't have the push button, but not everyone drives around a brand new car. So I'm sure there's plenty of vehicle owners out there with them.
And are these just amateurs going for joyrides? Are they?
I mean, essentially, look, when someone steals a car, whether they're using that car to commit other crimes, they're taking that car because they have the means to get rid of the car and put some money in their pocket, You know, it would depend on, but it's all the same to the person who's calling.
The other solution too is, you know, the old fashioned wheel locks, like
Yeah.
the steering wheel locks.
that are
That
out
works.
of cabinet now.
Yeah, that I used like,
Yeah.
you know.
Anything you can to make it, you know, less desirable and to try to take yours, and even with police work, a lot of times, you know, deterrence. I have heard what Yonkers has done in some of their retail locations. They've gotten orders of protection for the store manager or store employee. So now the thief, the shoplifter, you know, they can't go back. If they're told, okay, you know what, you're arrested, you can't go back there. You know, it's a trespass charge versus order protection's issued. Now it's a criminal contempt, it's a higher charge. But the thing is that if not everyone is doing the same thing, you know, if I had 100 police cars and they were just out there all the time, or I had enough police officers to put uniformed officers in some of our stores, you know, it wouldn't stop people from stealing, but it would make them more likely to steal somewhere else. And, you know, but that is also part of policing.
Could you tell us a little bit about the scope of how many officers and sort of generally speaking, what the buckets are on a daily or weekly basis?
Well, we are, our staffing limit right now is 115 officers.
Excuse me?
115 officers we are staffed with right now. We are actually a little below that due to retirements. And what people don't realize is that the police academy is 5 months long. An officer gets out of the police academy, they're with a field training officer for about 3 months. They do 2 weeks in communications and dispatch, and then they're finally out on their own, what feels like almost a year later. But if I decided I've had enough of this, I'm going to retire, I could be gone in about 2 weeks. Yeah, it would take almost a year to fill that spot. So turnover, you know, it's really part of it. You know, people get to where they're ready to retire, they have their life in order, so happy they do. But normally we run a little bit less than our authorized staffing because you can leave so much quicker than we can get someone to fill your shoes independent. You know, in terms of explaining the buckets, you can just clarify how you mean that.
In other words, you know, what are they doing on any, you know, what percentage of time is spent patrolling, responding, et cetera?
Well, the bulk of the police force is assigned to patrol 7 sectors, but there are often extra officers in addition to the ones covering the sector. There are supervisors out supervising them, but there's also investigator positions. So, you know, when someone goes into the store and steals X amount or whatever, but loss prevention is able to get a license plate, they have video of the suspect, maybe it's someone that's stolen there before and the detectives can perhaps follow up and make an arrest, or, you know, for any number of crimes, you know, burglaries, assaults, you know, assaults where the officers respond, but they maybe can't make an arrest in that moment. Quite often, the detective will be referred to the detectives. The detectives will essentially work on the case, develop it, and go out and make the arrest. And there's also administrative positions. My former position, which wasn't just civilian complaints and administrative matters, but also hiring new officers, hiring dispatchers, doing background investigations for essentially everyone that works for the police department, be it EMT, paramedic, dispatcher, civilian and records, so have you. So, you know, there are a number of different jobs, but, you know, as anyone in law enforcement will tell you, patrol is the backbone. They're the ones out there driving around, trying to deter, trying to apprehend. You know, you need a police report taken because property was damaged, you got into a car accident. They're the ones that come in and help you take that report. So,
Is it always when someone, do you guys always replace with new hires, or do you ever hire experienced officers from other departments? Like, is it always like just only new people?
We primarily hire from our present system. So a lot of us, most of us, I mean, there are officers that we've hired that moved to Greenburgh as adults, you know, and were hired by the police department, but there's quite a few of us that grew up here, and there's a reason for that. The familiarity, you know, don't get me wrong, I know quite a few people that work for the department that weren't Greenburgh homegrown, and they work just as hard and care just as much. But the philosophy and logic behind hiring off the residence list primarily is to build a police department that for Greenburgh that's comprised of Greenburgh. With that, we do sometimes hire transfers. Westchester County Human Resources, there are specific strict rules for hiring transfers. We can't hire transfers from NYPD because there has to be a parity, for lack of a better word, between the job that the officer is leaving. It's called a resignation reinstatement. The job that the officer is leaving and the job that the officer is going to. So it works when it's an officer or one police department in Westchester going to another police department in Westchester. And there's still things that you have to do to be able to do that. You also need a permanent line. And this is, I'm getting a little into the weeds, but let's just say I was recently promoted to sergeant. I'm on probation as a sergeant for a year. If I mess up or I show that I'm not adequately prepared to be a sergeant, I should be a sergeant, I could be moved back to my previous rank. What happens is I become a sergeant. The vacancy that I created at police officer, that's not a permanent line until I complete my probation. Because they, as a sergeant, because they have to hold it for me in case I mess up and have to go back. So you can't hire a transfer unless you have a permanent line. And normally, you know, we don't want to wait a year to try to fill a position. So we do occasionally take transfers. Sometimes when we get low on the list, and you know, perhaps if we feel like our options aren't the greatest with what's on the civil service list, we'll consider transfers. Or also, a transfer doesn't have to go to police academy because they're. So sometimes we'll do that to get an officer on the road faster, especially if we're in a situation where, you know, we feel like we need to replace the officer more quickly. But it does happen some, but you know, it's the exception of the rule. Yes, ma'am.
So I heard it mentioned that, you know, this catch and release thing, how bad is it really? You mean you arrest somebody and then he or she is out on the road the next day, or?
It's bail reform. And what it is that the law dictates now that for certain types of crimes, the person is essentially to be issued a desk appearance ticket and released versus being held for a judge to arraign. Now, there are certain types of crimes, certain types of things where if it's more serious, or if it's something where, you know, it's a domestic assault or something where an order of protection should be issued to the offender before they are released, then we can hold. But someone goes into a store and steals $30, $40, $50 worth of property, $100 worth of property. Essentially, we recover the property, we arrest them, we book them, we fingerprint them, we issue them a desk appearance ticket, and they have to come back to court. They're generally not held. And but with that, yes, there is a, you know, it's easier for some offenders to get back out and perhaps commit more crimes than it might have been if, let's just say the shoplifter, the same shoplifter, and we've arrested them 2 times in the last 2 weeks. You know what? To hold them for the judge, they've already got open cases. You know, that's something that may have been done in the past. We can't do that. So, you know, it's a reality, but, you know, we have to work within the rules that, you know, I don't know if I should announce the very important person that will. Yes,
When is she?
So this is not a question, this is really a testimonial. And I know a lot of people here are lifelong residents. I'm only a 30-year resident here. And I've lived here with my mother and my sister and other family members. And I just wanted to sort of do a little testimonial, frankly, about the town of Greenburgh Police, because I have been more than the beneficiary in terms of taking care of my mother, who aged in place and died happily at age 98, many emergency calls, and very, very wonderfully executed. And then last year in January, I had a little complaint, which I reached out to you on because my sister felt she was being followed in her SUV one morning as she was going up to Anthony P. Veterans Park to do her Zumba and her bridge. Reached out, you looked at it, you said, no, it's routine, it's not what we followed, da, 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 da. She was probably just being escorted.
It was part of the officer's routine.
That's right, part of the
To actually
officer's
go to
routine.
the park
But
and
she
walk
felt,
it.
she was very creeped out by it, you know? And subsequently, unfortunately, she got a very bad diagnosis and died, but you were able to also provide a wonderful police escort for us from the Sprain along Hartsdale Avenue by her home and then to Ferncliff. And so the town of Greenburgh Police have done well by me, is all I can say. I hope you continue in that mode, and I wish you the very, very best as chief. So I do have a question. I do have a question though about, you know, as you know, I'm aging in place, and what kinds of things should we be doing for ourselves? I mean, definitely lock the cars, you know, I get that, right?
Yeah.
But what other tips can you give us as we age in place in Greenburgh? Because I don't really want to leave. I may have to at some point, but you know, just sort of practical everyday tips as a homeowner and as a resident and so
You
on.
asked me a far more complicated question than you asked, but I'll share.
Yes.
My mother's 81. She still drives standard shift,
Uh,
volunteers at her church, works a part-time job.
yeah.
My kids are getting older and she's been helping me since the day they were born. She still continues. And again, it's one of those things, I happen to be a bit where you take my age
Yeah.
that I am. And you know, what's funny with my mother, she's pretty sharp. If we put something on the website, social media, warning people about fraud and tips, my mother would never see it.
Yeah.
If we send it to her house in the mail, she might see it, you know, but I think her natural skepticism, you know, and thank God her cognitive faculties being what they are, you know, she's not as vulnerable as some others their age. What it is really when we have family members and we start aging, you know your family member, and sometimes even if you're alone, it's hard to really assess well for yourself. But you know, for me, we will sometimes send out the flyers. There is a cost to doing the flyers. We recently did something on our social media, but again, I know that not everyone sees that. Whenever I meet with the Police Advisory Board, PCAC, and different community groups, you know, I will tell them, if you think you need us or there's a problem, you hear something, see something, we don't close 24/7, 365. Call, we'll send an officer. If you get a phone call, there are certain things, anyone asking for money, anyone saying that you can pay in a gift card, you know, basically, if you don't recognize the number, don't answer it, let them leave a message. You know, but again, depending upon how independent you are, you know, the person is and where their faculties are, they may or may not be more susceptible to certain things. Technology is always evolving, criminals are always evolving. So it's, you know, for those of them that can stay ahead of the curve, you know, really staying in touch with our relatives as they age. I know a big one is they call and it's like, oh, your grandson's been arrested and, you know, we need this much money in bail. It's really just sharing the information and trying to share that with people that might be more vulnerable or keeping an eye on the ones that, you know, we can kind of claim as our own to keep an eye on, making sure they're informed and, you know, they're staying, you know, they're basically making sure that they are able to still manage as independently as they are trying to. But what I would like to do also, and this came up on a different meeting, and I know I can reach out to Eric Zinger and he knows how to contact me, but maybe even just periodically, if we have something to share, we can put it out to the Civic Association president, leader, whoever, you know, secretary, whoever the best person is, and then that Civic Association can try to share it with its residents, because there really is no perfect way for getting in touch with everyone. And
I know we have a few more minutes. Anyone with any last questions before we let the chief go?
Good question.
Turn it off. Anyone who has a question that they don't want